Hi, this is Rand from RandMockGuitars. Thank you for joining me for the second episode of the Soma guitar build. We're going to be working on the body today, and this is a little bit of a convoluted mess. There's particular steps that need to happen in a particular order, and it's a little bit of unusual build for the typical guitar body. So let's not waste too much time, and let's jump right on in. So to start off with, one of the things I wanted to point it out is that I actually made the center line at an angle. And the reason for that is that the wood grain was actually going or veering off to the right. And one of the things I wanted to do is to have that grain following the line of the center point of the guitar. So by doing so, the wood grain is aligned with the actual center line of the guitar. From there, I'm moving on to just basically hogging out a whole bunch of material because we're going to be basically removing or routing out the tremolo cavity, the electronics cavity, and the tremolo block. So after a lot of consideration, I ended up deciding to go with the Vega Trem. The reviews on it are just amazing, and I'm hoping it lives up to the hype. One of the reasons why this video took me so long to put out was because I decided to make some templates. And so I spent the first half of February basically working on those. And I felt it was a little bit premature to kind of sort of go with templates at this point, and it's why I haven't had a set up until now. But I feel confident enough in the shape of the body and in the details that I think that making the templates was probably going to be a good time saver in the long run. And so already we get to our first complication in this build. I have to cut out the horn shape at this point early on. And what's going to wind up happening here is that the back wood is going to show from the front and the front wood is going to show from the back. And that will make sense later on down the road towards the end of the build. But for now, I'm going to set this piece aside and I'm going to cut this out on the top wood as well. So once I'm done cutting it out, I go back in there and I clean it up with the router bit. I'm trying to get these two pieces to match as perfectly as possible, even though there's always just a little discrepancy that has to be taken care of by hand. So here I am gluing the figured maple onto the black Limba. And what's going to eventually happen after I clean this up and it dries, it's going to actually put back into the same position from which it was removed. And again, it'll make sense down the road. So this guitar body features two carves. One carve is the back wood, or the top of the back wood gets carved, and then the top of the top wood gets carved to match. This is probably one of the most physically demanding parts of the entire body build, and it's also one of my favorite. I'm not sure if the final product really is worth all this extra effort. I'm not sure if it's all that noticeable to people, but I really do like the effect at the end. And this is ultimately what I'm looking for, this subtle curved effect on the back that eventually gets matched to the top. So here I'm making a tunnel for the wires, and I could have done this with my router in much less time, but I couldn't help breaking out the tools. During a build, I like to use as many of my tools as possible because, well, it's fun. This is also my first time working with black Limba, and I think it's really nice to kind of sort of use hand tools when you're working on a new species of wood, because it lets you know how it works. If it's got a lot of tear out, how it carves, how it feels. But ultimately, it's just more fun. And there you have it. And so here we go into the deep end. What I'm doing here is basically wetting the top of the guitar, and I've wet the top and the back of it. And what I'm going to do is heat it up, wet it, heat it up, and ultimately the goal here is not to get a real big curve on this. It's just basically loosening the wood grain up enough to get enough of a curve in here to make it match with the back carve that I've already done on the other piece. So as I apply the heat, I'm going to start to tighten the clamps, and that'll put a nice little curve into the wood. Now I'm going to repeat this process of wetting and heating and wetting and heating, and eventually I'm going to let it sit overnight like this. Um, Hopefully when I loosen the clamps, there'll be a little bit of that curve remaining within the wood, and it'll be nice and flexible. So I wasn't sure if this was going to work, and so I did this and I repeated the process over and over again. In the last prototype that I built of this, I tried this technique and it didn't work as well. So this is just a little bit different, and I'm hoping that the repeated wetting and the repeated drying and letting it sit there for about 24 hours will make it set this time. If this doesn't work, I'm going to have to figure out another technique in the future. I've also thought of using an electric blanket for this. I've seen acoustic guitar makers use heating blankets in order to get the heat generated to make this work. So the next evening, I took off the clamps and crossed my fingers, and I'm glad to report that it actually worked. I gotta admit, I was actually surprised. As you can see here, it's actually a pretty good match right off the bat, but I'm gonna sand both of these to get the fit just a little bit more precise. And so now I'm ready to glue these things up, and so I'm slathering this thing in glue and getting ready for the process. I'm going to be using my favorite types of clamps, which are basically screws. I'm just going to basically surround the entire perimeter of this with glues and then clamp afterwards. So this process reminds me a lot of tuning a drum. I'm working from the center out, and I think it's actually kind of sort of interesting the way it kind of sort of works. But by going from the center and then moving outwards, what I'm hoping for is that I'm going to be tightening the center and pushing the glue out. This hopefully will prevent any air pockets from being in between those two things, or any pockets of glue where the top and the back don't meet. And yes, I used a lot of screws. And just in case that wasn't enough, after cleaning up some of the glue, I decided to go ahead and just put some 2x4s with a clamp, just in case there was any separation happening. This may be a little bit of overkill, admittedly, but better safe than sorry. So, remember that part we cut off in the very beginning? This is the part where we actually used a flush trim router to get this part as smooth as we can, and then make sure that these two pieces match perfectly. And then we're going to glue the lower horn onto it again. So at this point, you can see the effect I'm going for. You can see the Limba from the front of the top, and when you flip this over, you're going to be able to see the maple from the back. By not cutting out the body shape, it makes this clamping job here so much easier. The first time I tried this, I actually had already cut out the body shape, and it made clamping just a complete mission, and I barely pulled it off. This is a much better way of doing so, but you have to finish the entire guitar before you get any preview as to the final shape. And here I am, pretty happy with the joint itself. And so now, finally, I get to cut out the guitar shape. Or as I like to call it, getting her out of her dress. And here we are. Finally, we have a guitar body. To be sure, there still has to be more routing to do. I've got to route out the neck pocket and basically route out the pickups. I also want to see if I can take off about 1/8 of an inch off the top and maybe about 1/16 of an inch off the back. The guitar body is still a little bit thicker than I wanted it to be at the end. But I love this effect of being able to see the contrasting woods together. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Is it worth it? If you want to see how this thing turns out, like and subscribe, and you can catch me building the overcomplicated neck that comes next. Anyway, see you next time. Peace out.